I have been a lifelong defender of Generation 3. Years of arguing that it's the best generation, all predicated on the fact that when I first played it, I was a dumb kid with zero critical thinking skills and way too much time on my hands. And believe it or not, these games have just turned 20 years old. And if you played this game on release, how's your retirement plan? Like, are you doing a 401k, something else, an IRA? You're gonna need that pretty damn soon, my friend, so get started. Now, like many of you, I played this game a ton as a kid, but that being said, it's been quite a while since I actually played vanilla Pokemon FireRed. And after my thoughts on Emerald and Hoenn kinda shifted upon replay, I decided it was time to dust off the old Game Boy and play some good old-fashioned Kanto, to see if this other half of Generation 3 is still peak Pokemon in 2024, or if I'm about to have a quarter-life crisis where I destroy my nostalgic memories for this game. But honestly, I didn't really expect my feelings to change on this game so much. And those of you who haven't played this game recently might be wondering if it's worth a replay 20 years later. And maybe you're wondering if you should play this game for the first time, but be warned, I will spoil quite a bit in this video. But today I have prepared for you an exquisite blend of nostalgia and retrospective light tour of this Kanto remake. So with that, let's dive into the first Pokemon remake and conjure up another team of the original 151. Or I guess it's 150, I couldn't find Mew under that damn truck. Also, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and watching my other video on Pokemon Emerald so I know that I should be making more videos like these and figuring out what the people want. Thanks. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen are a really special pair of games in my heart, and I'm sure a lot of you as well. I personally chose LeafGreen back in the day, and I played it so much my mom took away my cartridge on several occasions. Still not sure what she was afraid of, but considering I might be wasting my life away making a video on a 20-year-old Pokemon game and talking into the internet void, she might have had a point. It's a pretty stereotypical start for a game, as it's a relatively faithful remake of the game that started it all, which you'll find throughout this video is either a huge boon or a massive bane on this title. They have fixed a lot of the glitches and bugs from Generation 1, but we're stuck with the main 151 for most of the game. I think the music sounds amazing in this game, but it would have also been nice if they had added something like a proper day-night cycle. There's also this cool little intro montage every single time you boot up the game again, unless you're using an emulator and using save states. But let's actually play the game. After some dancing around our starting point, Pallet Town, we get our first Pokemon, and mine was Laird the Charmander. Now this might seem like the basic bitch choice, but I have actually never played throughout FireRed or LeafGreen with a Charmander before. I've always been a faithful member of the Squirrel Squad. And just like in the Hoenn games, this game is also very pretty. I love Game Boy Advance pixel art, and the saturated color palette and pixel art perfection is a joy to look at in every single town. And from start to finish, I never got tired of looking at these remastered towns in full glory. And although I do think the fact that this is a remake of a Game Boy game, it did kind of limit some of the areas just a tad bit. Sure, they definitely look better, but most of the spaces are a tad bit lacking, at least in detail, or compared to something like the nature-filled landscapes of towns in Hoenn. But it's probably something I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't hot off of Pokemon Emerald. And again, like Emerald, the game is just a little bit easier to play overall, and it's so much more user-friendly than the original Game Boy games. But what's it actually like to start playing this game and move towards our first goal of beat Brock, the first gym leader? Well, it's really slow. And that's even more exasperated by the fact that you don't even get the running shoes here until after beating Brock. So you'll be walking exclusively for like the first opening hour or two. And personally, this is awful. I just got done talking about emulation speed up ruining the vibe in my brain, but this game, I needed those running shoes. It's like, how expensive are running shoes here? I'm sure I had enough money after like Route 1 to go buy myself my own personal running shoes and not wait for this guy to hand me some. One thing they did update though was the move pools. Going into Brock, I was fully expecting a complete shit show by picking Charmander. I even caught and raised a Mankey named Wukong to fend off his hard rock type rocks. However, Wukong wasn't alone in this fight, and our mighty hero Laird learned Metal Claw early on, which is a pretty cool change, and overall, I didn't have much of an issue with my Mon's moves this time around, and while it might not be as good as some later game, it's definitely better than the original. and I'm even shocked with some of the moves my Pokemon were able to learn through TMs here.
And I will at least mention this game's lack of the physical special split, something that was only introduced in Generation 4 and beyond. Now for me personally as an older fan, this is something that I just kind of gotta turn my brain off and on when I go back and forth between the two games, but I understand that might not be the same for some people. So I do think if you want to play these games, you should at least look out for one of the game patches that you can patch the ROM or something like that to at least give this game a shot, because I don't think it's completely worthy of just ignoring it just because it doesn't have the physical special split, but that's just my opinion on the matter.
But now we do have running shoes, speed up, and the only thing that does slow us down now is encounter rates. These Mountain Moon encounter rates are mind-numbingly obscene, and several times I just took a couple of steps only to immediately be faced with another Zubat to electrocute. Also, yeah, I caught a Pikachu and named it Ash. No wonder so many of us have been cursed to abuse the speed up button when playing these games on emulators, but not only are the encounter rates a plague on your attention span, but trainers. Holy nugget bridge, back to back unavoidable trainers, and your reward is you get to talk to some freak who decided to get up and close and personal with his Clefairy. And I also thought Bill was maybe a little bit more, had a bit more lines or importance to the story, but honestly, he's just kind of a ditzy guy and didn't really have that much to say, which is a little bit of a trend, and then it's something I noticed throughout this entire playthrough. Lots of NPCs here are just completely dedicated to breaking the fourth wall or teaching you about Pokemon training, rather than adding really much to the world building of Kanto itself. And on a first playthrough, this is kind of nice. I'm sure I totally read each line, eager to learn when I was a kid, and I didn't just mash B like I did here just to figure out if they had something important for me to use. And one of my favorite parts about revisiting Emerald and Hoenn was all the dialogue and world building there, and just reliving that experience as an adult with a slightly higher reading comprehension. It was a treat. And this is only made worse by the fact that this game's story is pretty bare bones. And now we always have our basic goal of completing gym badges and just doing RPG team building shit, but there's usually a villain arc as well, and Team Rocket, it just doesn't age too well after several playthroughs. And now at the time they really hadn't perfected the villain arc and made it as interesting. And we had Team Rocket, and we had Team Rocket again, and then Baby's first climate activist debate show, and now they're finally doing some heinous shit, stealing Pokemon, selling them, experimenting. Giovanni is definitely a piece of shit, but overall it just doesn't hit as hard after like my 10th playthrough or something. I don't know. There is some cool lore and bits though, and information you can find later in places like the Pokemon Mansion. But overall, I think a lot of the enjoyment of Generation 1 and this game's lore has been from years and years of watching fan theories and creepypasta type shit, and most of that's not really front and center here, and I feel a normal person just playing this game, raw dogging it, really don't get any enjoyment from the story. Now let's get back on our journey to zapping Misty's tank of a Starmie. God damn, this thing took so many thunderbolts, Jesus Christ. And then on to beating up a war veteran, and as a kid I remember being very intrigued by the idea of a Pokemon in war, and apparently I was a tiny little fascist, but it's a piece of lore that really stuck with a lot of people, I think, and is an example of some thought-provoking dialogue or just the ramblings of just some roided out crazy guy. But he is the first person to have some sort of mildly interesting puzzle challenge in the game for us to solve, and the SSN is also here in Vermilion as a relatively memorable part of this game. Such an interesting idea for us to have a gauntlet of trainers like usual, but on a boat where a bunch of sailors are just puking their brains out everywhere. And there's another rival battle here, which I realize I haven't said too much about. Buttface, I do remember as an insecure little 8-year-old getting pretty pissed off at this guy, but I think he's one of the better rivals that we've gotten in the series, and there's a reason a lot of people compare him to the newer ones. And yes, when I was a kid I did name him Buttface on my second playthrough or something, like a true fan, but here I just chose the default one. I'm boring now. We also get the Versus Seeker, a new inclusion in this game which lets you battle trainers again, which would be a lot more fun and interesting if I actually used it more, since again, trainers are everywhere. I rarely found myself using the Versus Seeker. That being said, it's still a good option to have. And this game is relatively easy, though I was able to beeline most of the adventure without a need for grinding, and also not catching Pokemon. We'll see that bite my ass later. I did have memories of thinking this game was kinda non-linear, and while it's true, you can kinda sequence break a lot of gym battles, there's also a lot of roadblocks that require key items, and more than I remember. A lot of these have you just run around just to find the right key item to get through a Snorlax or a thirsty guard, wrong type of thirsty guard. And I don't think I would have had as much of an issue with this if, again, the NPCs had more interesting dialogue to keep the experience of chatting everyone up much more enjoyable and worth it. However, there's one area of this journey that has spawned more lore, more fan theories than any other. Anyone else remember the good old days when there was like 10 new fan theories on Lavender Town on YouTube a week? But I can see why. The music here immediately pierces your ears into your brain, giving you tinnitus in E minor. And while the town is very small, it does invoke a sense of unease and makes itself one of the most memorable. Or I just have PTSD. And the Pokemon Tower is full of these brainwashed, cracked out channelers saying weird shit like, "Come child, I have purified this space," which even makes me, a 28-year-old adult, creeped out. But that's not all the highlights, because honestly I do feel like this middle section of the game has some of the best moments in the entire game. The beginning was a little basic, but now you get a spooky town and a gambling town with a secret base hidden under the casino, and eventually a huge climactic takeover of the massive tower Silph Co. There's also this really interesting dynamic in Celadon where like half the population is addicted to gambling, I get it, and the other half is talking about the beauty of nature. And then there's also this horny freak. I bet him and the thirsty guard have a question with Pow at least once a week. And while I do appreciate the beautiful scenery of this game, I gotta gamble at least a little bit, and none of this modern day loot box shit. I need true slots. Put your coins in, cross your fingers, and lose all your money. I freaking love it, and fuck you, EU. We need this back. And then when you make your way to Silph Co, it's this huge, massive tower that Team Rocket has taken over. And this whole section is this turn-based equivalent of one of those Dynasty Warrior games. One young child versus 100 no-name grunts. It's truly epic shit. Also, your rival is just hanging out here like, bro, do you even care what's going on here? You just here to wait around and battle me? There's no saving the world for you, my guy. He's a real piece of work, and I don't know what his parents did or what subsequently Professor Oak did when raising this entire family, but it wasn't right, and it's probably nepotism. But that being said, after this, there wasn't quite as much excitement. The gym leaders were still kind of a pushover from this point onwards, and you do get some surfing around, so don't forget your rappels. And the Seafoam Islands are a pretty stunning area in this remake, but I'm also a real sucker for the color blue. I also caught Articuno in like 3 attempts, which was pretty nice, and I promptly added Sub-Zero to the team since I know exactly what's coming by the end of this game. And we finally make our way through Cinnabar Island, and while I'm writing this, I realize I completely forgot the fossil that I left there. The Pokemon Mansion does have some interesting, I guess you could call it that, lore. Mewtwo murdered some people or something. South America is canon. What the fuck's even going on here? The person who wrote these has been sniffing something a little bit too much, and there's even some lore suggesting that everyone's F4 fighter jet has gave birth? But regardless of this weird section, after beating Master Roshi, Bill comes back to finally make himself useful and introduce us to the biggest addition of this game, the Sevi Islands. I remember as a kid, I thought very fondly of the Sevi Islands. 7 little micro areas with varying amounts of content that are partially here to bridge the gap between this game and the other Generation 3 titles. And while your first trip here has you only visiting the first 3 to track down a missing girl and some pretty creepy, lore-accurate kidnapping scenario orchestrated by a rogue hypno. Like, maybe Cyrus had a point. Maybe we do need to remake this world and remove all the Pokemon like Hypno. But now it's time to make your way back home, only for your mom to ignore the fact that you've been gone for weeks. It's a common trend here, but like seriously, this was just a cool moment to have her acknowledge what you've accomplished to this point and give you one last word of encouragement as you go forward and take on your greatest challenge yet. But regardless, it's time to just go dunk on Giovanni one last time as all the Officer Jennies have been really slacking here and he's still allowed to walk free and have employment in this world somehow. And the incompetence of adults here does still hit quite home as a now voting adult who looks at the American legal and political system with just disgust and shame. But then we do another rival battle and you make your way towards Victory Road. And Victory Road itself involves about 20 different strength puzzles, but overall, due to its compact size trying to recreate the original, it's a pretty short one compared to some of the other in the series, and at least you don't need like 2 HM slaves just to get through it. Emerald. And the Elite Four and Champion are definitely not to be taken lightly here, though when I was a kid I do remember having to try this several times to get through it and even grind up my team a bit. It was a truly just epic challenge in this game, and this time I went through with fairly lowish levels because I didn't want to grind, but with my mons sitting at like high 40s, low 50s, I did create a fun challenge when some of the highest leveled here are like low 60s. And Lance is always as cool as always. I remember as a kid I used to try to draw this guy with his Dragonite, and I was never any good, but I think the true crowning achievement of this game is allowing you to destroy your snarky rivals' hopes and dreams of staying champion. His 15 minutes of fame is over, and even the biggest TikTok viral sensations are laughing at him now. But after that, that's the end of the game. You load yourself up into the Hall of Fame and roll credits and go back to Pallet Town. Except, because this is a remake, there's actually still plenty of post-game content. Now, in most of my more recent playthroughs of this Generation 3 games, I usually don't go back to the Sevi Islands in the post-game. I did it once or like twice, and that was basically it. But also imagine my surprise when I finally attempted and I had the goal of going there again, and I tried to visit Islands 4 through 7 and just nothing. This is when I realized you actually need to do the National Dex and do a little quest to find a ruby for cells, and getting the National Dex requires 60 Pokemon. How many did I have? 46. Ouch. So back to grinding, I guess, and I kind of get why they did this. They have been incentivizing you to collect more with Oak's aids. However, after a certain point, I was just so uninspired to catch any more since I've used the OG 150 Pokemon so much in so many playthroughs across like over 20 years of playing these games. So yeah, that kind of attitude bit me in the butt here, but whatever, I did what needed to be done, and if you haven't played these games all the way through, I do think it's still worth it to go here since there's tons of fun content here. Although I would highly recommend against filling out the entire National Dex. Just trust me, don't do it. There's also lots of cool side stories and a plot of some Team Rocket failures out there, and there's more Braille, yeah, more of it. And I'm really glad my friend had a guide on this when I was a dumb kid. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have ever gotten through any of this. There's also a trainer tower as well, but again, I'm hot off of Emerald with the Battle Frontier. It's just so much more compelling and definitely some good stuff. I think it's definitely set a standard for a better way to do new post-game content going forward from here. And it might be a little controversial, but as much as I enjoy going through Kanto in Generation 2, the first or like the second time, in more recent playthroughs, they've kind of just ended after the main game for me. But it's just kind of a little bit more of a lackluster Kanto compared to like games like this. But let me know if you'd actually like to see me covering either Gold, Silver, or the remakes in the future. But I'm not opening that complete can of Caterpies today. So that's the end of this video. Is Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen peak? Not really, especially when right in the same generation, right? We had Pokemon Emerald coming right after this game. But overall, I had a pretty enjoyable, nostalgic experience going through this game again, but I was definitely able to see its flaws just a little more clearly now. And I think this is definitely the definitive Generation 1 Kanto experience, so if you haven't played through this game in a while, or you're a newer fan, I highly recommend you go and give this game a try at some point. But if you're replaying, I would also kind of recommend that you just try one of the rebalances or harder hacks for this game. Maybe something that at least gives you a little bit more Pokemon selection and is a little less vanilla on that route. But otherwise, like, subscribe, especially if you want more videos like this where I just play and talk about some vanilla-ass Pokemon games from the perspective of a longtime fan turned hater turned fan again. See ya.